Hello everyone, welcome to Easy Economics. How are you all doing? I hope you all are doing good. Today I brought for you all October-November 2025 9708 variant 32. We'll be looking at MCQs today. Let's see what this paper has brought for us. Moving forward, MCQ number 1. MCQ number 1 talks about what is the definition of moral hazard. Now we know moral hazard occurs when people behave more recklessly, more carelessly, since they do not bear the full consequences of their actions. Like, for instance, if you know that your car is being covered by insurance company, so you're going to drive it more recklessly. So let's look at the options. Option A says an increase in the likelihood of taking risks because another party is paying for these risks. That's exactly what the answer is. So for one, we'll shade in A. Why it can't be the remaining options? B says the loss of social welfare arising from the consumption of a good. That is about negative externalities. So we'll chop B. C says the loss of social when buyers and sellers have different amounts of information regarding product quality. So that's talking about asymmetric info. That's not relevant. D says when costs and benefits are taken into account when a decision is being made. So when you are considering the costs and benefits, so you're actually making a rational decision. So again, that's irrelevant to what the question is asking. So for one, we'll shade in A as the correct answer. Moving forward, B. MCQ number B talks about consumers budget line. Now notice the vertical axis displays the quantity of good Y and the horizontal axis displays the quantity of good X. Now what are they saying? On the vertical axis, they are displaying 100 units for good Y and 50 units for good X. Now they're saying what would determine the slope of the budget line. Now first tell me what does the line actually represents. You see, budget line is actually determined by prices. So what does it shows? It shows all the combinations of two goods a consumer can afford, provided their income level and whatever the prices are given. So now keeping this definition in mind, you would define budget line as income, which is price of X plus price of Y. So the slope would be determined by the price of X upon the price of Y. This is the slope. And the negative sign would talk about how much you are foregoing it, right? So looking at that, let's look at the options. What determines the slope of the budget line? A says the marginal rate of substitution of good X for good Y. It cannot be A because A is talking about the slope of indifference curve. But here we are talking about the budget line. B says the price of good X multiplied by the price of good Y. It's not multiplied, it's divided. So it cannot be B. C says the ratio of the price of good X to the income of the consumer. So it's not divided by the income, rather it's divided by the price. So it's not C because budget line not determines slope, right? Income shifts. It's talking about income shifts. D is the correct answer because it's talking about the ratio of the price of good X to the price of good Y. So for 2, we'll shade in D as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 3. MCQ number 3 displays a number of costs. They're talking about marginal social costs, marginal private costs, marginal social benefit, marginal private benefit. The vertical axis displays the costs and the benefits. The horizontal axis displays the quantity. Now they're saying the diagram shows the marginal cost and the benefits of producing a good in a free market. What is the marginal external cost when free market is in equilibrium? So now first you tell me when a free market is in equilibrium, what sort of a situation it is? When marginal private cost is equals to marginal private benefit. So now look at the curve and tell me where is the private cost MPC intersecting MPB? It's intersecting at point X here. Now at point X, we have to determine the external cost. Now, external cost is the difference between the social cost and the private cost. So at X, this vertical difference between the marginal social cost and the marginal private cost will talk about the negative externalities. So this vertical difference is Vx. This is the marginal external cost. This vertical distance represent marginal external cost. So for 3, we'll shade in C as the correct answer. I hope you've understood. Moving forward, MCQ number 4. MCQ number 4 says a firm has very high fixed costs but low marginal cost of production. It experiences continuous economies of scale so that the minimum efficient scale is not reached until the firm is very large. So now they say, although the initial costs are high, the fixed costs are high, but marginal cost of production is low, and until and unless it reaches a very large size, it won't achieve economies of scale. The efficient scale will not be achieved. So now they're saying which type of structure matches this description. Monopolistic competition, monopsony, natural monopoly, or oligopoly. Obviously, it talks about a natural monopoly because we all know that's a situation when a single firm is supplying the whole market. So it's very giant or gigantic in size, right? And that too, it supplies its product at a lower cost, right? As compared to other small firms. So it has to be C. It cannot be A because in A, again, there are a number of small firms. It cannot be B because in B, you're talking about one single buyer. It cannot be D because, again, in D, not necessary that the firm achieves economies of scale. So it has to be C. Moving forward, MCQ number 5. Now, MCQ number 5 displays us marginal utility for two goods, X and Y. They've given prices for each. For X, it's 2. For Y, it's $1. And now they are saying if the consumer spends all of its income on both of these products, which combination would yield the consumer the maximum amount of utility? Now, how to go about solving this question is we will calculate the marginal utility per unit. So that means we'll calculate mu upon P. So we'll calculate mu upon P for each, for X and for Y. So for that, we need to divide marginal utility by its price. Here we'll divide it by 2 and here it has to be by 1. So when it has to be divided by 1, it will remain the same. And here when we'll divide by 2, what should be the answer? 110 divided by 2 would yield us 55. This would be 40. This would be 33. At 4 units, it's 28. And at 5 units, it's 16.5. Here it would be 30, 33, 38, 50, and 66. Now, what's the formula? In order to ensure which combination yields you the maximum utility, we'll go for the consumer equilibrium rule, which is marginal utility for good X upon price of X should be equal to marginal utility for good Y upon price of Y. So now you tell me where is the marginal utility per unit for X equates the marginal utility for Y. It's here. At 3 units for X and 4 units for Y. That means it's option C. So 5 will shade in C as the correct answer. Moving forward. I hope you understood. MCQ number 6. MCQ number 6 is an economist undertakes a cost benefit analysis of the pollution that results from a manufacturing process. So now the economist is trying to determine how much are the externalities and the benefits out of a manufacturing process, which outcome is most likely to guide any recommendation about the optimal level of manufacturing output. So now how are you going to determine which is the optimal level of output? Optimal level of output is where MSC, marginal social cost, is equals to marginal social benefit. So that's the very first option, that the marginal social cost equates to marginal social benefit. So for 6, we'll shade in A. Moving forward, MCQ number 7. MCQ number 7 again displays multiple curves, cost curves. Now this time they are displaying curves for cost and revenues for a monopolist. Now, this thing, which level of output represents sales maximization? When we are talking about sales, we are talking about revenue. And we all know revenue is equals to price into quantity. When we are talking about maximization of revenue, we means what? We mean total revenue, which is price into quantity. But the revenue is going to be maximum at what? When marginal revenue is zero. So look at the curve for marginal revenue and tell me when it's going to be zero. When it's going to be cutting the x-axis. And where is it cutting the x-axis? It's cutting the x-axis at point D. So we'll shade in D as the correct answer. I hope you understood. Moving forward, MCQ number 8. MCQ number 8 says what might help achieve allocative efficiency. Now, allocative efficiency is when there is best utilization for the economic resources. And when would that happen? When the government would be giving subsidies. Why? Because this way the government would be ensuring an increase in the consumption and the production for both merit goods, right? It cannot be A because this might increase market power differentiation. It cannot be C because monopsony again causes labor market failure. It cannot be D because again supernormal profits indicate what? Imperfect competition. So it has to be B. So for 8, we'll shade in B as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 9. What is the essential feature of nudge theory? Nudge theory is when you are influencing without forcing. Like, for instance, if you've kept healthy foods without asking people to eat them, right? So you are sort of persuading them. So look at the options, and option number D says the idea of persuasion. So for 9, we'll shade in D as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 10. MCQ number 10 says a government is a policy where income tax is paid only after the first $20,000 of income has been earned. Now, what would make the government's policy more equitable? So, now if you want a more equitable form of taxation, out of these four options, which displays a more equitable option? Now, if you look at the options, option B talks about integrating the tax and welfare systems by introducing a negative income tax. That's the correct answer. Negative income tax is what? Negative income tax is when low income households receive payments and high income households pay taxes. So this is what is going to make it more equitable, right? It cannot be A because A says decreasing the threshold for paying income tax to 10,000 for all taxpayers. So this is going to worsen the situation. Similarly, D is also going to worsen the situation because if you are going to keep it on testing all benefits means and charge it even if real incomes are falling again, it's going to worsen off. It's not going to make it equitable, right? And C is talking about universal benefits rather than making it equitable. That's why we aren't choosing C. So out of all these four options, B is the correct answer. 10 is B. Number 11. 11 talks about the government imposing a maximum price for rice of P2. Now, notice initial equilibrium was at point P. P1 was the equilibrium price. Q2 was the equilibrium quantity. Now, the government imposed a maximum price is imposed where? It is imposed below the equilibrium price. But here, if the government has imposed it above the equilibrium, so it would be ineffective. That gives us the answer. So the price would remain unchanged. It would be ineffective. Why? Because maximum price is imposed below equilibrium, but here it is above equilibrium. So at P2, it's not binding. So the price would remain unchanged. So for 11, we'll shade in B as the correct answer. I hope you've understood. Moving forward, MCQ number 12. MCQ number 12 says a government intervenes to raise the wages of a group of workers to prevent their exploitation. So now the government intervenes in order to ensure that the supplier does not exploit workers by paying them less. Where might this government intervention be justified? Where do you think government intervening makes sense? Now, A says in an industry that is protected by tariffs on imports from abroad. It cannot be A because tariffs protect domestic firms, not workers. B says in an industry where trade union negotiates workers' wages. So if trade union is already working, so it won't be justified if the government intervenes. So it cannot be B. C says in an industry where the output is produced by a single firm monopolist. Monopoly refers to a one single seller, not employer. So it cannot be C. It has to be D when an industry where workers are employed by a monopsonist. That means one dominant employer who is setting the wages. So he has all the wage setting power. So there are more chances that he might exploit workers. So 12 is D. 13. What is likely to reduce the domestic money supply? Now, out of these four options, which is going to reduce the amount of money circulating in the economy? Option A says banks being allowed to hold a liquidity ratio that's less. That's going to increase money supply, not reduce. C says the government financing its budget deficit by borrowing from the banking sector. So if the government is going to borrow from the banking sector, again the money supply is going to increase. D says the government increasing its borrowing from other countries, again it's going to increase. So it's B, where individuals choose to hold more money in the form of idle balances. Why? Because if people are preferring to hold more cash, so there's going to be less money circulating, more money lying idle. So that's going to reduce the money supply. So for 13, it has to be B. Moving forward. MCQ number 14. The unemployment rate in an economy is continuously rising even after the economy has recovered from a recession. Which explanation is not correct? Now, many foreign businesses have moved out of the country. If foreign businesses keep on moving out, unemployment will rise. So it cannot be A. C says an increase in net migration of low workers. D says workers lose skills. Both C and D will be the causes. Even after the recession is recovered, they could be the causes for continuous unemployment. It's B. Why? Because if the government has abolished the national minimum wage rate, so this means now the labor is cheap. It's cheaper to hire labor. So unemployment should not rise because of this reason. Right? Unemployment has to fall. 14. B. Number 15. In which situation is expansionary fiscal policy least likely to be effective? That means even though if the government is increasing its expenditure and reducing the taxes, but it's not being effective, when would that be? A says inflation is below its target. It cannot be A because if it's below its target, we would be using expansionary policy to achieve it. C says there is a negative output gap. A negative output gap means spare capacity exists. So it cannot be C. D says unemployment is high. So high unemployment means we are going to be using expansionary policy to increase aggregate demand. So it cannot be C, it cannot be D. It's B where there is a lack of confidence in the economy where people are reluctant to spend. So rather they save and investors are reluctant to invest. So 15, it's B. Moving forward. MCQ number 16. MCQ number 16 displays us four different diagrams that talks about money supply and the demand for money. Now they displayed the rate of interest on the vertical axis and the quantity of money on the horizontal axis. They displayed the money supply and they are asking that the demand for money is initially at LP1, and if there is a policy of quantitative easing, what would be the effect on the rate of interest? Now, quantitative easing will occur when the central bank is buying government bonds and it's injecting money into the economy. So what should happen? Money supply should increase. So money supply would increase from MS1 to MS2. And where is it happening? It's happening in option A. So for 16, we'll shade in A. Moving forward. MCQ number 17. MCQ number 17 says what is most likely to increase if an economy enters a negative output gap. A negative output gap is where actual GDP is less than the potential GDP. That means you are underutilizing your resources. So that means there is what? There is unemployment. So the unemployment rate would increase. 17 will shade in D. 18. A country with a managed exchange rate, that means it has a fixed exchange rate, is constantly having a deficit on its current account. It decides to devalue its currency. Now, if it devalues its currency, so the exports are going to be cheaper and imports are going to get expensive. Now, which conditions must be there to help a devaluation achieve the objectives the government is trying to achieve, right? So, Marshall-Lerner condition is what? Marshall-Lerner condition is where the price elasticity of demand for exports plus the price elasticity of demand for imports has to be greater than 1, right? That means it has to be elastic. So, Marshall-Lerner condition has to be satisfied. So, it has to be a yes and a yes. What about the level of employment? The level of employment must be below full employment or full employment. It must be below full employment. Why? There must be some spare capacity so that when, because of devaluation, comes an increase in demand for a country's exports, it has got capacity to cater to that increase in demand. Otherwise, it's going to cause an increase in inflation, right? So it has to be below full employment and it has to meet the Marshall-Lerner condition. So for 18, it has to be C. I hope you've understood. Number 19. What would cause an individual's demand curve for an active money balance to move to the left? Active money balance is money held for transactions. So if look at the options. A says increase in the frequency of income payments. B says increase in the general price level. C says increase in individual's income. D says increase in the rate of interest. The very first option says an increase in the frequency of income payments. So this means that the salary is being paid more frequently. So less money would be required to be held at a time, right? So it has to be A. Why it can't be B? Because B would increase the demand for transactions. It cannot be C because it will lead to an increase in demand for money. Similarly, it cannot be D because it affects speculation. The rate of interest is going to affect speculation. So for 19, we'll shade in A. Number 20. Our government funds an increase in transfer payments to the unemployed by increasing the higher rate of income tax. What is the most likely impact of this change? Now, look at the options. A says government borrowing increases. B says the incentive to work increases. C says the marginal propensity to consume increases. D says the quantity of imports increases. Now, if the rich is taxed to pay for the unemployment benefits, so the money is going to be transferred from rich households to those that are unemployed. So those with low marginal propensity to consume to high marginal propensity to consume. So, what should be the answer? C. The marginal propensity to consume should increase. So for 20, we'll shade in C as the correct answer. Number 21. 21 says which combination shows the most likely outcome if a government increases the level of direct taxation. So now, if the government is penalizing profits or income levels, what's going to happen? Direct taxes would reduce what? Disposable income. So disposable income will fall, consumer spending would fall, aggregate demand would fall, inflation would fall, firms would be producing less, unemployment would rise, right? So looking at that, what should be the answer? Inflation should fall and unemployment should increase. It cannot be A. Why? Because inflation will not increase. It cannot be B. Because economic growth will not increase. D says unemployment decreases and balance of payment improves. Unemployment will not fall. So it cannot be D. So it has to be C. I hope you've understood. Number 22. 22 says in an economy, the price elasticity of demand for imported raw materials is zero point 0.3. The price elasticity of demand for exports is also zero point 0.3. So if there's a depreciation of the country's currency, what should be the impact on inflation? Now, since both the PED for imports and exports is zero point 0.3, it's showing what? Inelastic. So what should a devaluation do? A devaluation would not reduce imports. So this means the inflation rate due to cost push factors would what? Increase because it would make imports expensive. So it could be an increase. What about because of the demand pull factors? Exports would get cheap, but since the PED is inelastic, it's zero point 0.3. So there will be little or no change. So inflation due to demand pull factors would decrease. So for 22, we'll shade in C as the correct answer. Moving forward. MCQ number 23. 23 says a government is aiming to reduce unemployment from 10 to 5%. So if it's trying to reduce unemployment from 10 to 5%, what is the likely effect if this aim is achieved? So if the government is successful, what would happen? A says a decrease in interest rates, a slowdown in economic growth, an increase in demand for exports, an increase in inflation. So if unemployment falls, what would happen? The spending would increase, right? People would have more power. But then what about inflation? As unemployment decreases from 10 to 5%, aggregate demand would increase, right? So labor is also going to get scarce and wage pressure would increase. So this satisfies the Phillips curves details. So inflation would increase. So for 23, we'll shade in D. Moving forward, MCQ number 24, which statement is correct? Economic development is necessary for economic growth. Economic growth and economic development are directly proportional. Economic growth enables economic development, and economic growth is always sustainable. Now, what is economic growth? Economic growth is an increase in real GDP. And what is economic development? When there's an improvement in the quality of life and living standard. So, it's what? Economic growth enables economic development. It's when there's an increase in the real GDP, then there occurs an improvement in quality of life and living standard. It cannot be B. They are not directly proportional because it's not necessary that an increase in economic growth, if there's an increase in real GDP is being enjoyed by everybody and everybody is going to be benefited by an increase in standard of living, right? So it has to be C. Moving forward. MCQ number 25 says, what is a trade weighted exchange rate? Very going by the definition, trade weighted exchange rate compares one currency against several currencies. So it gives greater weight to the currencies, the basket of other currencies, right? So for 25, it's A, the price of one currency against the basket of other currencies. Moving forward, MCQ number 26. United Nations is giving aid to a developing country so that it's able to buy vaccinations. How is this aid characterized? Is it bilateral or multilateral? Since it's coming from an international organization, it is bilateral. And since it's for a relevant purpose, so it is tied. So it has to be tied and it's multilateral. So 26, it has to be C. Moving forward, MCQ number 27. Protectionist policy a government might use to reduce the deficit on its BOP. A protectionist policy is when a government is trying to protect its home producers. Look at the options: revaluation, increase in the rate of income tax, increase in the rate of interest rate. This is monetary policy. A will worsen it. B says increase in income tax. This is fiscal policy. So it has to be D, introduction of import quotas, where you are reducing the imports, you're placing a limit, reducing the imports, and protecting your home producers. So for 27, it is D. Moving forward, 28. 28 displays a Lorentz curve of the distribution income of households. That is saying which curves out of these A, B, C, and D would show the most equitable distribution of income for households. So then the key to solve this question is that the closer the line is to 45 degrees, the more equitable distribution it would be. Why? Because 45 degrees shows perfect equality. So if you look at the curves, which is most closest to 45 degrees? It's D. So 28 will shade in D as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 29. MCQ number 29 says an economy has a large surplus on its BOP, so it revalues it. That means the currency appreciates, it gets stronger. But what happens? The current account in its BOP becomes a greater surplus in the short run. Now, in the short run, the surplus gets even more. In the long run, it gets into a deficit. So, what would be the sum of elasticities for imports and exports in the short run and the long run? Now, notice the revaluation made the currency stronger in the short run. Why? Because the size of the surplus expanded. So, what should have been the elasticities then? It must have been inelastic. That is why, even though the currency got stronger and the exports got expensive, still there was an improvement in the surplus, right? So that some of the price elasticities has to be inelastic. So when it's inelastic, it has to be less than one. So it could be C or D. In the long run, it worsened. So it means it was elastic. It was elastic. It responded, right? So it has to be C then. So 29 will shade in C. Last MCQ. What is not a characteristic of an emerging economy? Emerging economy is when an economy is moving from developing to developed. So when it is moving from developing to developed, it is moving away from agriculture to tertiary and manufacturing. So it would be having higher birth rates. It would be having higher potential for growth. It would be having higher access to education. So all these would be the characteristics of an emerging economy, but it would not have A as the characteristic. Why? Because once it's moving away, it's becoming an developed economy, so it would concentrate on tertiary and manufacturing sector and not agriculture. And here they are asking what is not a characteristic. So we'll shade in A as the correct answer. So for 30, it's A. I hope you understood and enjoyed solving this paper with me. I'll be back with more such papers for you. Stay tuned, subscribe, happy learning.